to be empty. Preston had texted her that morning saying he had back-to-back meetings until 6 o'clock, which was why the sound of his voice drifting from his home office made her pause in the entryway, her purse still hanging from her shoulder. She almost called out to him, almost announced her presence, but something in his tone stopped her. It was a tone she hadn't heard in months, maybe years. What? Happy. The way he used to sound when they first started dating 12 years ago, when everything between them felt easy and full of possibility. Her hands stayed frozen on the doorknob as she listened, her body instinctively understanding that whatever she was about to hear would change everything. I'm telling you, baby, it won't be much longer now, Preston said, his voice carrying that intimate softness that used to be reserved only for her. I've already talked to the attorney. He says with her income being so low compared to mine, I won't have to give her much of anything. Maybe the old Toyota and enough for a small apartment somewhere. That's it. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Her heart seemed to stop beating for one long, terrible moment before it kicked back into a painful, rapid rhythm that made her feel dizzy. She pressed her back against the wall in the hallway, out of sight but close enough to hear every single word that followed. I know, Tiffany, I know, Preston continued, and now Naomi could hear him laughing. Actually laughing. 12 years of pretending to care about her boring interior design projects and her stupid paint samples. Do you know how many times I had to nod and smile while she showed me fabric swatches? God, I can't wait to be done with all of that. With her. The migraine that had brought Naomi home early suddenly felt like nothing compared to the pain that spread through her chest. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her designer work bag forgotten beside her, and she wrapped her arms around her knees while her husband continued destroying their marriage from the next room. The house will sell fast in this market, Preston said. It's a great property and we can use that money for our place. Something modern, you know? Not filled with all her vintage furniture and those ridiculous throw pillows she's always buying. And once we're married, we can start planning that trip to Europe you've been wanting. Maybe I'll finally propose properly on the Eiffel Tower or something romantic like that. There was a pause, and Naomi could picture him smiling that charming smile he used to give her, the one that had made her fall in love with him when they met at a friend's barbecue all those years ago. She'd been 25 then, fresh out of her design program and full of dreams about building her own business. Preston had been 28, working in commercial real estate, confident and successful and interested in everything she had to say. Or so she'd thought. No, she doesn't suspect anything, Preston assured whoever Tiffany was on the other end of the line. She's completely clueless. Works so much on those little residential projects of hers that she barely notices what I do anymore. Honestly, it's made this whole thing so much easier than I thought it would be. I was worried there'd be drama, you know? But I think when I ask for the divorce, she'll just sign whatever I put in front of her. She's not exactly a fighter. Naomi pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making any sound. Not a fighter. The words echoed in her head, bouncing around like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread wider and wider. She thought about all the times she'd chosen peace over confrontation in their marriage, all the times she'd let Preston make decisions because he seemed so sure of himself, all the times she'd quietly accepted his lack of interest in her work because she didn't want to be needy or demanding. Love you too, baby, Preston said, his voice going even softer. I'll see you tonight after I convince Naomi I'm working late. We can celebrate our future. Just a few more weeks and all of this pretending will be over. I can't wait to wake up next to you every morning instead of sneaking around. You're everything she's not. Beautiful, exciting, actually interested in my career. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I have to go. She might call. Love you. The sound of Preston ending the call seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. Naomi heard his chair scrape against the hardwood floor of his office, heard his footsteps moving toward the kitchen. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed her purse, and slipped back out the front door as quietly as she'd come in. Her hands shook so badly that she dropped her keys twice before managing to unlock her car. She sat in the driver's seat in her own driveway, staring at the house she'd spent years making into a home. The house where she'd painted every room herself in carefully chosen colors. The house where she'd refinished the hardwood floors on her hands and knees. The house where she'd built window seats and installed crown molding and created a space that felt warm and welcoming and full of love. Or what she thought was love. The afternoon sun caught the windows and made them gleam, and for just a moment, the house looked like something from one of those home design magazines she loved to read. Picture perfect. Beautiful. Completely hollow underneath. Naomi started her car and backed out of the driveway. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't walk back into that house and face Preston and pretend she hadn't heard him planning to discard her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience in his path to happiness. She drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away and sat in the parking lot with her phone in her hands, staring at the screen without really seeing it. Preston texted her at 4:30. "Hey babe, meeting's running late. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." She stared at those last 2 words until they stopped looking like words at all, just shapes on a screen that meant nothing. He'd probably sent the exact same message to Tiffany, whoever she was, except the "love you" would be real. The "love you" meant for Tiffany would come with actual feeling behind it, not just habit and convenience. Naomi's phone rang then, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. The name on the screen made her breath catch again, but for a different reason this time. Genevieve Laurent. They'd been roommates in design school for 2 years, close friends who dreamed about building empires together someday. Then life had happened and they drifted apart the way people do. Genevieve had moved to New York to join her family's fashion business. Naomi had stayed local, met Preston, gotten married, let her dreams get smaller and smaller until they fit inside the safe boundaries of her quiet life. They hadn't spoken in almost 5 years. Not since Genevieve's mother had passed away and Naomi had sent flowers to the funeral. Why was Genevieve calling now? "Hello?" Naomi answered, her voice coming out rough and strange. "Naomi. Oh my God, I finally found your number." Genevieve's voice was exactly as Naomi remembered it. Confident, warm, full of energy that seemed to vibrate through the phone. "I've been seeing your work online, those interior design projects you post on Instagram, and they're absolutely stunning. I've been meaning to reach out for ages, but you know how time gets away from you. Anyway, I'm actually going to be in your city next week for business meetings, and I would love to take you to lunch and catch up properly. Are you free?" Naomi opened her mouth to make an excuse, to say she was too busy, to keep hiding in her small, safe life where she'd apparently become so invisible that her own husband was planning to erase her. But instead, she thought about Preston's voice saying she wasn't a fighter. She thought about 12 years of making herself smaller. She thought about that interior design degree from a prestigious school that she'd never told Preston she had because he'd met her after graduation and she'd never corrected his assumption that she'd gone to community college. "Actually," Naomi said slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest like tectonic plates moving, "I'm free next week. And Genevieve? I could really use a friend right now." "Perfect," Genevieve said, and Naomi could hear the smile in her voice. "Trust me, darling, you're going to love what I have to tell you. I think the universe might be handing us both something amazing. I'll text you the details." After they hung up, Naomi sat in her car for another hour as the sun started to set and the coffee shop parking lot slowly emptied out. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first met Genevieve. Ambitious, talented, full of fire and determination. She thought about how she'd let Preston's lack of interest in her work convince her that maybe she wasn't as good as she'd thought. She thought about how she'd stopped entering design competitions and stopped pitching to high-end clients and stopped believing she deserved more than the small residential projects that barely paid enough to cover her expenses. Then she thought about Preston laughing about her paint samples and fabric swatches. Preston calling her boring. Preston planning to leave her with almost nothing because he assumed she'd just accept whatever he decided. Naomi started her car again and drove to a hotel downtown. She checked into a suite and stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow she would go home and act normal. She would smile at Preston and pretend she didn't know anything. She would play the role of the clueless, boring wife one more time. But inside, something had broken open. And what came flooding out wasn't tears or pain or the urge to beg him to stay. What came flooding out was something cold and clear and absolutely certain. Preston wanted to divorce her quietly and leave her with nothing? Fine. She could be quiet too. But by the time she was done being quiet, Preston was going to wish he'd never underestimated her. Naomi went home the next morning after Preston had already left for work. She took a long shower in her own bathroom, dried her hair with care, and dressed in one of her simple work outfits. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of coffee and began making a list. Not a list of everything that hurt or everything she'd lost. A list of everything she was about to do. First on the list was her attorney. She'd used a real estate lawyer named Barbara Chen when she bought the house before she married Preston, and Barbara had been sharp and thorough. Naomi pulled up her contact information and sent an email requesting a consultation for a divorce. She marked it urgent. Then she opened her banking app and looked at her accounts. The checking account she shared with Preston had about $8,000 in it. Their savings account had another $20,000. Not bad, but not nearly what it should be considering Preston's six-figure salary in commercial real estate. Naomi frowned at the numbers, then opened a new browser window and started searching for information on how to check for hidden assets. What she found made her stomach turn. There were dozens of articles about spouses hiding money before divorce. Separate accounts. Offshore transfers. Cash businesses. Cryptocurrency. The more she read, the more certain she became that Preston had been planning this for longer than she'd realized. That confident statement about leaving her with almost nothing suddenly made more sense. He'd probably been moving money around for months. Naomi opened a document on her laptop and started writing down every financial detail she could remember. Bank statements. Tax returns. Preston's work bonuses. The sale of their old car. Her grandmother's inheritance that she'd kept in a separate trust account that Preston didn't even know existed because she'd set it up before they married and never mentioned it. She'd wanted to see if Preston would love her without knowing she had money of her own. She'd wanted their relationship to be about them, not about what she could provide financially. That trust had about $450,000 in it now. Money from her grandmother, money from smart investments, money that had been sitting there growing while Naomi pretended to be someone who earned $30,000 a year from small interior design projects. The truth was she earned $30,000 a year because she deliberately kept her business small, afraid that becoming too successful would somehow threaten Preston's ego. She laughed out loud in her empty kitchen, a sound that came out bitter and sharp. All those years of making herself less so Preston could feel like more, and he'd been planning to leave her anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text from Genevieve. Lunch reservation at Le Bernardin next Tuesday at noon. Or something fabulous. I'm taking you somewhere special afterward. Naomi stared at the message. Le Bernardin was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of place where entrees cost more than what most people spend on groceries in a week. The kind of place Preston had always said was too pretentious, whenever she'd suggested they try it for an anniversary. She'd stopped suggesting fancy dinners years ago. I'll be there, she texted back. Then she opened her closet and looked at her clothes with new eyes. Most of what hung there was practical and modest. Jeans and simple shirts for client meetings. A few dresses for the rare occasions when she and Preston went out, all of them conservative and forgettable. Nothing that screamed success or confidence. Nothing that looked like it belonged to a woman who'd graduated top of her class from a design program that cost $60,000 a year. Naomi pulled out her laptop again and opened her favorite luxury shopping sites. She'd browsed them for years, looking at beautiful clothes she told herself she didn't need. Now she added items to her cart without hesitation. A tailored blazer in deep navy. Wide-leg trousers in cream. A silk blouse in midnight blue. Leather heels that cost more than her current monthly clothing budget. She used the credit card connected to her trust account, the one Preston had never seen, and paid for overnight shipping. Then she called a salon she'd been following on social media for years, the kind of place where celebrities went to get their hair done. I need an appointment as soon as possible, she told the receptionist. Full service. Cut, color, styling. Whatever you recommend. They had an opening that afternoon. Someone had canceled. Naomi took it as a sign. Preston came home at 6:30, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Hey, he said, barely looking at her. What's for dinner? I ordered Thai food, Naomi replied from the couch, where she sat with her laptop balanced on her knees. It should be here in 20 minutes. Thai again? We just had that last week. Preston frowned, finally looking at her properly. His eyes narrowed slightly. Did you do something different with your hair? Naomi touched the ends of her newly trimmed and highlighted hair. The stylist had given her subtle dimension that made her natural curls look glossy and healthy instead of frizzy. Just a trim, she said casually. Preston disappeared into the bedroom to change. Naomi went back to her laptop, where she'd been researching Genevieve's company. Laurent Fashion Group had expanded significantly in the past 5 years. They now owned multiple luxury brands and had partnerships with some of the biggest names in design. Genevieve herself had been featured in Forbes last year as one of the youngest billionaires in the fashion industry. And Genevieve wanted to have lunch with her. Wanted to talk about her work. Naomi felt something flutter in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. The doorbell rang with their food delivery. Preston paid and brought the containers to the table. They ate in near silence, Preston scrolling through his phone while Naomi pushed noodles around her plate and thought about everything she'd learned about divorce law that day. Community property. Asset division. Alimony. Fault versus no-fault divorce. I might have to work late tomorrow, Preston said eventually, not looking up from his screen. Big deal closing. Okay, Naomi said. She knew he wasn't working late. She knew he was seeing Tiffany. But she kept her voice even and unconcerned. Let him think she was clueless. Let him think she'd never figure it out. After dinner, Preston went to his office to catch up on emails. Naomi cleaned the kitchen, then retreated to the guest bedroom with her laptop. She'd started sleeping there a few nights a week, claiming Preston's snoring kept her awake. The truth was she couldn't stand lying next to him anymore, couldn't bear the feeling of his body next to hers when she knew his heart was somewhere else entirely. She opened her email and found a response from Barbara Chin. I can see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please bring any financial documents you have access to. I'll have my assistant send you a confidential intake form to fill out before the appointment. Naomi filled out the form that night, sitting cross-legged on the guest bed in her old pajamas. When she got to the question about grounds for divorce, she paused. Then she selected adultery and began writing out everything she'd overheard in Preston's office. Every word she could remember. Every cruel laugh. Every plan he'd made to leave her with nothing. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. She saved the document, sent it to Barbara Chin, and finally let herself cry. But even as tears ran down her face, even as her shoulders shook with the force of everything she'd been holding in, Naomi felt something else underneath the grief. Something hard and determined and absolutely unwilling to break. Preston thought she wasn't a fighter. Preston thought she'd just accept whatever he decided to give her. Preston had no idea who he was actually married to, because Naomi had spent 12 years hiding her true self to make him comfortable. She was done hiding now. And she was about to show him exactly what he'd lost. Barbara Chen's office was in a modern building downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the financial district. Naomi sat in a leather chair across from Barbara's desk and watched the attorney review the documents she'd brought. Bank statements. Credit card bills. Tax returns from the last 3 years. Screenshots of the text messages Preston had sent claiming to be working late. A detailed written account of the conversation she'd overheard. This is good, Barbara said finally, looking up with sharp brown eyes. Very good, actually. You've done most of my initial investigation work for me. Now, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? He's been planning to leave me with almost nothing, Naomi said quietly. How much uglier can it get? Barbara's expression softened slightly. Men like your husband don't like being caught off guard. When he realizes you're not going to roll over and accept whatever he offers, he might become vindictive. He might try to drag this out. He might try to smear your reputation or claim you're being unreasonable. Let him try, Naomi said. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Barbara. But once she'd said them, she realized they were true. She was tired of being careful. Tired of worrying about Preston's feelings. Tired of making herself small. All right then. Barbara pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Let's talk strategy. First, you mentioned a trust account your husband doesn't know about. That's separate property, not marital assets, so it's completely protected. Good. Second, this evidence of adultery strengthens your position considerably, especially if we can prove he's been hiding marital assets in preparation for divorce. Third, I'm going to recommend we hire a forensic accountant to examine all of your joint finances. They spent 2 hours going over every detail. By the time Naomi left Barbara's office, she had a plan. A real, concrete plan that made her feel like she had some control over the disaster her life had become. She also had something else. Barbara had asked, almost casually, do you want him to know you're preparing for divorce, or do you want to wait and file first? I want to wait, Naomi had said without hesitation. Let him think he's in control. Now it was Thursday afternoon, and Preston had texted that morning to say they needed to talk when he got home from work. Naomi knew what was coming. She'd been expecting it since she overheard his phone call. She'd spent the last 3 days preparing for this exact moment, and still her hands shook slightly as she set the table for dinner. She'd made lasagna, Preston's favorite. She'd opened a bottle of good wine. She put on makeup and a nice dress. She wanted to look like the devoted wife one last time, wanted Preston to feel the full weight of what he was about to destroy. Or what he thought he was destroying. He had no idea what was actually about to happen. Preston came home at 7, right on time for once. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. Preston was normally confident to the point of arrogance, comfortable taking up space and assuming everyone would accommodate him. But tonight he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot and couldn't quite meet her eyes. That smells good, he said, gesturing to the lasagna cooling on the counter. Your favorite, Naomi said with a smile. I thought we could have a nice dinner together. We haven't done that in a while. Something flickered across Preston's face. Guilt maybe. Or discomfort. But he sat down at the table and let Naomi serve him, accepted the wine she poured, and even complimented the food after his first bite. They ate in silence for several minutes before Preston finally cleared his throat. So, there's something I need to talk to you about, he began, still not quite looking at her. Something important. Naomi set down her fork and gave him her full attention. What is it? Preston took a long drink of wine, then another. This isn't easy to say. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I think we both know that things between us haven't been great for a long time. We've grown apart. We want different things. And I think maybe we'd both be happier if we just admitted that and moved on. Moved on? Naomi repeated softly. I want a divorce, Preston said, the words coming out in a rush now that he'd started. I know this is probably a shock and I'm sorry for springing it on you like this, but I think it's the right thing for both of us. We can keep this civil and simple. No need for lawyers or fighting. We'll just split things fairly and go our separate ways. Naomi looked at her husband across the table they'd eaten at for years. She looked at his face, so familiar and yet suddenly so strange. She thought about the man she'd fallen in love with and tried to find him in the person sitting in front of her now. But he wasn't there. Maybe he'd never been there. Maybe she'd been in love with a version of Preston that existed only in her imagination. Okay, she said. Preston blinked. Okay. Okay, I'll agree to a divorce. Naomi picked up her wine glass and took a sip. You're right that we've grown apart. If you think this is what's best, then I won't fight you on it. The confusion on Preston's face was almost comical. He'd clearly been bracing for tears, for begging for some kind of dramatic scene. Instead, Naomi sat calmly eating her dinner and looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're not upset? He asked carefully. Of course I'm upset, Naomi said. You're ending our 12-year marriage. But I'm not going to fall apart over it. We're both adults. If this is what you want, then we should handle it maturely. Preston seemed torn between relief and suspicion. That's very reasonable of you. I've always been reasonable, Naomi said, and there was just the slightest edge to her voice now. You should probably know that about me after all these years. Right. Yes. Of course. Preston fumbled with his napkin. So, I was thinking we could draw up a simple agreement. You know, you keep your car and your design business stuff, I keep my car and my work equipment. We sell the house and split the proceeds. Clean and simple. We should both get lawyers, Naomi said. Even if we're being civil, it's smart to have proper legal representation. Just to make sure everything is done correctly. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't think we need to waste money on lawyers for a simple divorce. Then why don't you draw up what you think is fair and send it to me? Naomi suggested. I'll look it over and let you know if I have any concerns. That seemed to satisfy him. Preston relaxed, clearly thinking he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. A compliant wife who would sign whatever he put in front of her without question. He even smiled a little as he finished his dinner. I'm glad you're being so mature about this, he said. I was worried it would be messy. No mess, Naomi promised. Just a clean break. After dinner, Preston retreated to his office to start organizing paperwork. Naomi cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counters and loaded the dishwasher. Then she went upstairs to the guest bedroom and called Barbara Chen. He asked for the divorce, she said quietly. Just like you predicted. Good, Barbara replied. Don't sign anything he gives you without sending it to me first. And Naomi? You did great. The calmer you stay, the more he'll underestimate you. I know, Naomi said. And she did know. She'd spent years being underestimated by Preston. She'd let him believe she was simple and uncomplicated and not particularly smart. She'd watched him dismiss her work and her opinions and her dreams. Now all of that was going to work in her favor. Preston thought he was in control. Preston thought he'd planned this perfectly. Preston had no idea that while he'd been plotting with Tiffany, Naomi had been plotting too. The difference was, Naomi's plans actually had substance behind them. She looked at her phone and saw a text from Genevieve. Can't wait for Tuesday. I have so much to tell you. Naomi smiled for the first time in days. It was a real smile, not the fake one she'd been giving Preston. Tuesday felt like a lifetime away. But she could wait. She'd gotten very good at waiting, at being patient, at playing the long game. Preston wanted a divorce? Fine. He could have one. Just not the divorce he was expecting. Not even close. The new clothes arrived on Friday, and Naomi spent Saturday morning trying on every piece in front of the full-length mirror in the guest bedroom. The navy blazer fit like it had been tailored specifically for her body. The silk blouse made her skin glow. The heels added 3 inches to her height and made her legs look impossibly long. She looked like someone important. Someone successful. Someone who hadn't spent years dimming her own light. Preston was at the gym, or so he claimed. Naomi suspected he was actually with Tiffany, celebrating his successful divorce request. She didn't care anymore where he was or what he did. Her focus had shifted entirely to Tuesday and the lunch that felt like it could change everything. She spent the rest of the weekend organizing her portfolio. All the design projects she'd completed over the years, photographed professionally and arranged in a leather-bound book she'd never shown to anyone. Small projects, yes, but each one demonstrated her skill and creativity. She'd transformed boring apartments into cozy homes. She'd made cramped kitchens feel spacious. She'd chosen color palettes and furniture arrangements and lighting fixtures that turned ordinary spaces into something special. Looking at her work with fresh eyes, Naomi realized something she'd been afraid to admit for years. She was good at this. Really good. She'd just never given herself permission to believe it. Preston barely spoke to her all weekend. He'd moved his things into the master bedroom and left her the guest room without discussion. They moved around each other like polite strangers, which is what they'd actually been for probably longer than Naomi wanted to acknowledge. On Monday night, she laid out her outfit for the next day with the same care she'd once used planning her wedding day look. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. Naomi showered and spent extra time on her hair, using the expensive products the salon had recommended. She applied makeup carefully, emphasizing her eyes and lips. Then she put on the navy blazer, cream trousers, and silk blouse. The heels came last, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This woman looked confident, successful, like someone who had never doubted herself or made herself small for anyone. Naomi wanted to be this woman for real, not just in her reflection. Going somewhere? Preston asked when she came downstairs. He was eating cereal at the kitchen counter, still in his pajamas even though it was almost 11. Lunch with an old friend, Naomi said casually. I'll be back later this afternoon. Preston barely looked up from his phone. Okay. I'll probably be out tonight anyway. With Tiffany, Naomi thought but didn't say. She grabbed her portfolio and her new leather bag and walked out to her car with her head high. The old Toyota that Preston had planned to leave her with started on the first try, as if it too was ready for this new chapter. Le Bernardin was exactly as impressive as Naomi had imagined. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a historic building downtown, with soaring ceilings and elegant decor that managed to feel both timeless and modern. The hostess greeted her warmly and showed her to a corner table where Genevieve was already waiting. Naomi almost didn't recognize her old friend. The Genevieve from design school had been pretty and stylish but still figuring out her look. This Genevieve was polished perfection. Her black dress probably cost more than Naomi's car payment. Her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. Her hair was cut in a sharp bob that framed her face beautifully. She looked like money and power and success all rolled into one elegant package. Naomi. Genevieve stood and pulled her into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume. Oh my God, look at you. You look amazing. So do you, Naomi said, meaning it. I almost walked right past your table because I didn't recognize you. They sat down and Genevieve immediately ordered champagne. We're celebrating, she announced. I don't care that it's Tuesday. We're celebrating a reunion and also what I'm about to propose to you. Over the next hour, between courses of the most incredible food Naomi had ever tasted, Genevieve caught her up on the last 5 years. The expansion of her family's business. The brands they'd acquired. The partnerships they'd formed. She talked about the stress of running a billion-dollar company and the loneliness that came with being at the top. She talked about how she'd never stopped thinking about the late nights in their dorm room when they'd planned out their dream careers together. I've been following your work online, Genevieve said seriously as they shared a dessert that was almost too beautiful to eat. Naomi, you're incredibly talented. The way you use color and space, the way you make even the smallest room feel intentional and special. It's exactly what I need for a new division I'm launching. Naomi set down her fork. What kind of division? Luxury interior design, Genevieve said, her eyes bright with excitement. High-end residential and commercial spaces. Think celebrity homes, flagship stores, hotel suites. I've already hired architects and project managers, but I need someone to lead the actual design work. Someone with vision and taste and the ability to create spaces that feel both elegant and livable. You want me to work for you? Naomi said slowly. I want you to be my partner, Genevieve corrected. co-owner of the design division. Lauron Design Collective. Your name on the company alongside mine. Creative control over all projects. Salary and profit sharing that will make you wealthy in your own right. And Naomi? I'm not just offering this because we're old friends. I'm offering it because you're the best person for the job. I've seen your work. I know what you're capable of. I just need you to believe it too. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. I'm going through a divorce, she said quietly. My husband is trying to leave me with almost nothing because he thinks I can't fight back. Genevieve's expression hardened. Then let's prove him wrong. Say yes to this, Naomi. Say yes and let me help you build the life you deserve. Not the life someone else thinks you should have. The one you actually deserve. Yes, Naomi said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff into clear water. Terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Yes, I want to do this. Genevieve's smile was brilliant. Perfect. Now finish your champagne because we're going shopping. I'm taking you to Rodeo Drive, and we're getting you a wardrobe that matches your new position. Partner in a luxury design firm needs to look the part. I can't afford Rodeo Drive, Naomi started to say, but Genevieve waved her hand dismissively. Consider it a signing bonus. Besides, I have personal stylists at half these stores. They'll give us privacy and champagne and make this fun instead of stressful. Trust me, you're going to love this. They spent the next 4 hours in some of the most exclusive boutiques Naomi had ever entered. Genevieve was right about the personal stylists, who brought out pieces one at a time and helped Naomi see herself in a completely new way. By the time they finished, Naomi had 3 shopping bags full of beautiful clothes that made her feel powerful and confident. She also had something she hadn't had in years. A real friend. Someone who saw her potential and wanted to help her succeed. Someone who didn't need her to be small or quiet or convenient. They stopped for coffee at an outdoor cafe on Rodeo Drive, and Genevieve pulled out her phone to show Naomi some of the initial projects they'd be working on. As they sat there laughing and planning and dreaming, Naomi didn't notice the man with a camera across the street. Didn't notice him taking photo after photo of her and Genevieve at their cafe table, surrounded by shopping bags from the most expensive stores in the city. She also didn't see those photos being uploaded to a celebrity gossip site less than an hour later with the headline Billionaire Heiress Genevieve Lauron spotted shopping with mystery woman. She didn't know that by the time she got home that evening, those photos would have been shared thousands of times across social media. All Naomi knew was that for the first time in 12 years she felt like herself again. The version of herself she'd buried and hidden and almost forgotten. And it felt absolutely incredible. Naomi woke up Wednesday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. For a confused moment, still half asleep, she thought something terrible had happened. An emergency with her family. A crisis with Preston. But when she finally focused enough to actually read the messages, she realized it was something else entirely. OMG, is this you? From her cousin Rachel with a link attached. Girl, call me, from her best friend from college, followed by 5 exclamation points. Why didn't you tell me you were friends with billionaires? From a former coworker. Naomi clicked the first link with trembling fingers. It opened to a celebrity gossip website called The Luxe Life, and there on the homepage was a photo of her and Genevieve from yesterday. They were laughing at the outdoor cafe, shopping bags visible on the ground around their table. Genevieve looked exactly like herself, polished and elegant and recognizable. But the woman sitting across from her, the one throwing her head back in genuine laughter, took Naomi several seconds to recognize as herself. She looked happy, confident. The kind of woman who belonged in that setting, who didn't question whether she deserved to be there. Her new clothes fit perfectly, and the afternoon sun caught the highlights in her hair. She looked nothing like the quiet, modest woman who'd been married to Preston for 12 years. The headline read, Mystery Woman. Who is Genevieve Lauron's new BFF? And the article itself was pure speculation. Was she a business associate? A new designer? Someone from Genevieve's past? The comments section had hundreds of responses, people trying to figure out who Naomi was and how she knew one of the most famous young billionaires in the country. Naomi scrolled through more of the messages on her phone. The photos had been picked up by at least 6 other gossip sites. Someone had posted them on Twitter, where they'd been retweeted over 5,000 times. Her Instagram account, which she'd kept private and rarely updated, had suddenly received over 200 follow requests. She was still staring at her phone in shock when she heard footsteps outside the guest bedroom. Preston knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for her response. He was holding his own phone, and his face was a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like anger. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, thrusting the phone toward her. Naomi looked at the screen. It was showing the same photo from the Lux Life website. "It's me having lunch with a friend," she said calmly. "That's Genevieve Laurent," Preston said, as if Naomi might not know who she'd been having lunch with. "The billionaire. How do you know her?" "We were roommates in college," Naomi said. She got out of bed and walked past Preston to the bathroom, deliberately casual. "We reconnected recently." "You never told me you went to college with a billionaire," Preston said, following her to the bathroom doorway. "You never asked about my college experience," Naomi replied, turning on the sink. "You assumed I went to community college because I never corrected you." She could see Preston's reflection in the mirror, could see him processing this information. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed. "What college did you go to?" "Parsons School of Design in New York," Naomi said, enjoying the way his expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Full scholarship. I graduated at the top of my class." "Parsons is one of the best design schools in the country," Preston said slowly. "I know. I went there." Naomi began brushing her teeth, effectively ending the conversation. Preston stood in the doorway for another long moment before finally walking away. By the time Naomi was dressed and checking her phone again, there were even more messages. But the most important one was from Genevieve herself, sent at 6 in the morning. "Hope you're ready for your 15 minutes of fame. The publicity team at Laurent Fashion is fielding calls about you. Don't worry, we're not giving out any information without your permission. But this is actually perfect timing for announcing the new design division. Call me when you're up." Naomi called her immediately. Genevieve answered on the first ring, sounding wide awake and almost excited. "This is wild, right?" Genevieve said. "I didn't even notice the photographers yesterday. But honestly, Naomi, this is great exposure for what we're building. Everyone wants to know who you are and how we're connected. When we announce Laurent Design Collective next week with you as co-founder, it's going to create major buzz." "Next week?" Naomi repeated. "If you're ready," Genevieve said. "I know it's fast, but sometimes you have to take advantage of momentum. Plus, it might be good timing with your divorce. Show your soon-to-be ex-husband exactly who he's losing." Naomi thought about Preston's face this morning. The confusion and anger and dawning realization that he'd never really known who she was. The satisfaction of that moment was stronger than anything she'd felt in years. "Let's do it," she said. The next few days were a whirlwind. Genevieve's publicity team reached out to schedule a photo shoot and interviews. Naomi met with Barbara Chen to update her on the new business opportunity, which would significantly change her financial situation for the divorce proceedings. The forensic accountant Barbara had hired discovered that Preston had been moving money into a separate account for 8 months, exactly as Naomi had suspected. "He's hidden about $75,000, Barbara told her during a phone call on Friday. "Plus he's been paying for a separate apartment where I assume he's been seeing his girlfriend. All of this will work in your favor when we go to court." Naomi should have felt angry or hurt, but mostly she just felt tired. Tired of Preston's lies, tired of pretending their marriage had been something it wasn't. She was ready to move on. Ready to let go of the version of herself who had stayed in that marriage for far too long. On Saturday, she met Genevieve at a photography studio downtown. The shoot was for the press release announcing Laurent Design Collective. Naomi wore one of the outfits they'd bought on Rodeo Drive, and the photographer positioned her and Genevieve in front of a backdrop of architectural drawings and fabric samples. "You're naturals at this," the photographer said after the first few shots. "Most people are so stiff in front of the camera, but you two look like you've been doing this for years." "We're just excited," Genevieve said, squeezing Naomi's hand. "This has been a long time coming." During a break, Naomi checked her phone and saw a text from Preston. "We need to talk about the divorce papers. I'm having my lawyer draw something up next week." She showed the text to Genevieve, who read it and rolled her eyes. "He has no idea what's about to hit him, does he?" "None at all," Naomi confirmed. And she couldn't wait to see his face when he finally figured it out. The press release went out Monday morning at 9 a.m. exactly. Naomi watched from her laptop in a coffee shop across town, not wanting to be home when Preston inevitably saw the news. The release was professional and concise, announcing the launch of Laurent Design Collective, a new luxury interior design division of Laurent Fashion Group. It featured the photo from Saturday's shoot and named Naomi as co-founder and creative director. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by major business publications. Within 2 hours, Naomi's phone was ringing non-stop with interview requests and congratulatory messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Within 3 hours, her Instagram had gained 10,000 new followers. And then, exactly 3 hours and 20 minutes after the press release went live, Preston called. Naomi let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. On the fourth call she finally answered. "Hi Preston," she said pleasantly. "What the hell is going on?" Preston's voice was barely controlled. "Co-founder? Creative director? How is this possible?" "I'm good at interior design," Naomi said simply. Genevieve recognized that. "We're going to build something amazing together." "But you don't have any experience with luxury clients," Preston sputtered. "You do small residential projects. Living rooms and kitchens." "I do those projects because I kept my business small," Naomi corrected. "Not because I'm not capable of more. I think you'll be surprised what I can do when I'm not holding myself back." There was a long silence on the other end. When Preston spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer. Almost worried. "Naomi, I think maybe we should talk about the divorce. Maybe we were too hasty. Maybe we should try counseling first." And there it was. The exact moment Naomi had been waiting for. The moment when Preston realized he'd made a terrible mistake. When he understood that the boring, quiet wife he'd been planning to discard was actually someone valuable. Someone successful. Someone he couldn't afford to lose. "No," Naomi said quietly. "I don't think so. You asked for a divorce and I agreed. Let's stick with that plan. Your lawyer can send the papers to my lawyer. Her name is Barbara Chin and I'll text you her contact information." "Naomi, wait." She hung up. Then she blocked his number. She was done having conversations with Preston. Done explaining herself or justifying her choices. From now on, everything would go through their attorneys. Everything would be clean and legal and documented. She felt lighter than she had in years. Like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't even know was there, and someone had finally lifted it off her shoulders. The woman in those viral photos, the one laughing with her successful friend surrounded by shopping bags, wasn't someone Naomi was pretending to be. She was who Naomi actually was. And she was just getting started. Preston showed up at the house on Tuesday evening when Naomi was packing boxes in the bedroom. She'd started moving her things out, preparing to find her own place. Or maybe she'd use some of that trust money to buy something outright. A condo with big windows and lots of natural light. A space that was entirely hers. "We need to talk," Preston said from the doorway. He'd clearly tried to look good for this conversation. Fresh haircut, pressed shirt, that cologne he knew she used to love. "Please, Naomi." Face to face. She sat on the edge of the bed and gestured to the chair by the window. "Fine. Talk." Preston sat down and ran his hands through his hair. "I made a mistake. With the divorce, with everything. I was confused about what I wanted and I hurt you and I'm sorry. But I think we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work on our issues, start over." "Why?" Naomi asked simply. The question seemed to throw him. "What do you mean why?" "Because we're married. Because we have 12 years together." "You were willing to throw away 12 years last week," Naomi pointed out. "What changed?" "I saw how successful you're becoming," Preston admitted. "I didn't realize you had that kind of potential. If I'd known." "If you'd known I could be successful, you wouldn't have left me?" Naomi interrupted. "Do you hear how that sounds?" Preston shifted uncomfortably. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Naomi stood up and crossed her arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you wanted to divorce me when you thought I was just a small-time interior designer making $30,000 a year. But now that you know I went to a prestigious design school and I'm partnering with a billionaire, suddenly you want to work things out." "It's not about the money," Preston insisted. "Yes it is," Naomi said calmly. "It's absolutely about the money. Or about status or whatever it is you think being married to a successful woman will give you. But here's what you don't understand, Preston. I've always been this person. I've always had this potential. I just hid it because I thought it would make our marriage work better." "You hid it?" Preston looked genuinely confused. "I kept my business small because you seemed uncomfortable when I talked about wanting to expand," Naomi explained. "I never told you about my degree from Parsons because you made assumptions and I didn't correct them. I pretended my grandmother's inheritance didn't exist because I wanted to see if you'd love me without knowing I had money. I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger." "That's not fair," Preston said, but his voice was weak. "What's not fair is spending 12 years with someone who never bothered to ask me about my dreams or my past or what I really wanted out of life," Naomi replied. "What's not fair is overhearing you on the phone with your girlfriend, laughing about how boring I am and how you can't wait to be done with me." Preston's face went pale. "You heard that?" "Every word," Naomi confirmed. I came home early from work and heard you planning our divorce with Tiffany. Heard you talking about leaving me with almost nothing. Heard you mocking my work and calling me clueless. That's when I decided to stop pretending. That's when I reached out to Genevieve and hired a divorce attorney and started planning my actual future instead of the limited one you were willing to give me. I was angry when I said those things, Preston said desperately. I didn't mean them. Yes, you did, Naomi said. You meant every word. And honestly, Preston, that's okay. Because it showed me exactly who you are. Not the man I thought I married, but who you really are underneath. Someone who only values people based on what they can do for you. That's not true, Preston said, but he couldn't look at her. Let me ask you something, Naomi continued. Did you know that I pay for my own car? That I use my grandmother's inheritance for all my personal expenses? That none of your money has actually supported me in years? Preston stared at her. What? I have a trust fund worth almost $500,000, Naomi said. It's been there the whole time we've been married. I never needed your financial support. I never needed you to take care of me. I chose to contribute less to our joint expenses because I was trying to be a traditional wife, but I could have left you at any point and been completely fine financially. She watched Preston process this information, saw the moment he realized how thoroughly he'd misunderstood their entire relationship. He'd thought he had all the power. Thought he was the one making all the important decisions. Thought Naomi would be lost without him. He'd been wrong about everything. So when you file for divorce, Naomi continued, and you try to claim you should keep most of our marital assets because you earned more, remember that I have my own money that you can't touch. And remember that you've been hiding $75,000 in a separate account, which my forensic accountant has already documented. And remember that you've been paying for an apartment for your affair partner, which is considered dissipation of marital assets and will work against you in court. Preston's mouth opened and closed without sound. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed plans collapse in real time. How did you find out about the apartment? He finally asked. I hired good lawyers, Naomi said. Unlike you, I didn't assume this would be easy. I didn't assume I could just tell you what you were getting and have you accept it without question. I prepared. I gathered evidence. I built a case. This is insane, Preston said, standing up. You're acting like I'm some kind of villain. You asked me for a divorce, Naomi reminded him. You planned to leave me with as little as possible. You've been having an affair for months at least, probably longer. You've been hiding money and paying for a secret apartment and lying to my face every single day. What exactly about that makes you the good guy in this situation? Preston didn't have an answer for that. He stood there in the bedroom they'd once shared, looking smaller than Naomi had ever seen him. Finally, he said quietly, I never knew you were like this. I know, Naomi said. That's the problem. You never bothered to know me at all. After he left, Naomi sat on the bed and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back during that conversation. Anger and sadness and relief and a strange kind of grief for the marriage she'd thought she had. But underneath all of that was something stronger. Pride. Pride in herself for not backing down, for not accepting Preston's half-hearted apology, for insisting on her own worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Genevieve. Coffee tomorrow? I want to show you the office space I'm looking at for our headquarters. Naomi smiled and replied yes. Tomorrow she'd look at office spaces and plan her new business and keep building the life she actually wanted. Tonight, she'd finish packing and start letting go of the past 12 years. She'd spent so long being the person Preston wanted her to be. Now she was going to spend the rest of her life being exactly who she was meant to be. And that person didn't need Preston's approval or validation or even his understanding. She just needed to keep moving forward. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 3 months after Preston had initially asked for the divorce. 3 months during which Naomi had moved into a beautiful loft apartment downtown, set up the new Laurent Design Collective offices with Genevieve, and landed their first 3 major clients. 3 months during which Preston had apparently broken up and gotten back together with Tiffany twice, according to mutual friends who still tried to stay neutral. Naomi sat in the courthouse conference room with Barbara Chen on one side and Genevieve on the other for moral support. Preston sat across the table with his attorney, a middle-aged man named Richard who kept looking at the folders in front of Barbara like they contained something toxic. Let's begin, the mediator said, a tired-looking woman named Judge Patterson who'd probably seen 1,000 divorces just like this one. Mr. Preston Bryant is petitioning for divorce from Ms. Naomi Bryant. Both parties have submitted financial disclosures and proposed settlement agreements. Let's start with assets. Barbara opened her first folder. Your Honor, We'd like to present evidence that Mr. Bryant has been systematically hiding marital assets in preparation for this divorce. He opened a separate bank account 8 months ago and has transferred $75,000 into it. He's also been paying for a separate apartment at the Riverside complex, spending approximately $2,000 per month in rent and furnishings. This apartment was used for an extramarital affair. She slid documents across the table. Bank statements, rental agreements, receipts. Preston's face went red, but his attorney maintained a neutral expression. Additionally, Barbara continued, Mr. Bryant claimed in his initial filing that the marital home should be sold and proceeds split evenly. However, Ms. Bryant can prove she paid the entire down payment from a separate inheritance account before the marriage. The home is therefore partially separate property. That's not relevant, Richard interrupted. They've been married for 12 years. Any separate property has been commingled. The trust account from which the down payment was made has remained entirely separate throughout the marriage, Barbara countered. Ms. Bryant has meticulous records showing no commingling of separate and marital funds. The down payment of $80,000 should be returned to her before any remaining equity is split. Judge Patterson reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Mr. Bryant, did you disclose the separate account and apartment in your initial financial statement? I didn't think they were relevant, Preston said, but his voice lacked conviction. You didn't think an apartment you've been renting for 6 months was relevant to your divorce? Judge Patterson's tone was sharp. Or $75,000 in hidden marital assets? Richard jumped in quickly. Your Honor, my client was simply planning ahead for his post-divorce living situation. By hiding money and lying on legal documents? Barbara said sweetly. That's an interesting interpretation. The mediator went through every asset line by line. The house that Naomi would keep after Preston was forced to buy out his share of the equity minus her down payment. The cars, which they'd each keep their own. The retirement accounts, which would be split proportionally. The savings accounts, where Preston's attempts to hide money meant Naomi was entitled to a larger share as compensation. Now let's discuss alimony, Judge Patterson said after 2 hours of negotiations. Ms. Bryant is requesting spousal support based on the disparity in income during the marriage. My client now has a substantial income from her new business, Richard argued. She's co-founder of a successful design firm. She doesn't need alimony. That business launched 2 months ago, Barbara replied. Ms. Bryant spent 12 years earning significantly less than Mr. Bryant because she was supporting his career and managing their household. She's entitled to transitional alimony while she builds her new business. We're requesting $3,000 per month for 3 years. 3 years? Richard looked outraged. That's excessive. It's 1/4 of the length of the marriage, Barbara said. It's actually quite reasonable. Especially given that Mr. Bryant's misconduct contributed to the dissolution of the marriage. They argued back and forth about the amount and duration, but Naomi could see Judge Patterson's expression and knew they'd won. The judge was not impressed with Preston's attempt to hide assets or his affair or his claim that Naomi didn't deserve support. Here's my ruling, Judge Patterson finally said. Ms. Bryant will retain the marital home after Mr. Bryant pays her $50,000 for his share of the equity. All marital savings accounts will be split 60-40 in favor of Ms. Bryant to compensate for Mr. Bryant's dissipation of assets through the hidden account and affair-related expenses. Retirement accounts will be split 50-50. Mr. Bryant will pay Ms. Bryant $2,500 per month in spousal support for 30 months. All debts remain the responsibility of whoever incurred them. Preston looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Your Honor, that's not fair. Mr. Bryant, you hid assets and lied on your financial disclosure, Judge Patterson interrupted. You're lucky I'm not holding you in contempt of court. This settlement is more than fair given your conduct. Do you accept these terms or do you want to go to trial where your misconduct will be a matter of public record? There was a long silence. Finally, Richard leaned over and whispered something to Preston, who slumped in his chair and nodded. My client accepts, Richard said. Excellent, Judge Patterson said. I'll have the final decree drawn up by the end of the week. This marriage is dissolved. You're all dismissed. In the hallway outside the conference room, Genevieve pulled Naomi into a tight hug. You did it, she said. You actually did it. We did it, Naomi corrected, smiling at Barbara. Thank you. For everything. It was my pleasure, Barbara said. Men like Preston need to learn they can't just walk all over people and expect no consequences. You stood up for yourself and look what happened. Naomi glanced back toward the conference room, where Preston was arguing with his attorney in low, angry tones. She felt nothing when she looked at him. No anger, no sadness, no regret. He was just a man who'd made bad choices, and now he had to live with the results. She was free. Completely, legally, officially free. Free to build the life she wanted without worrying about making Preston comfortable or small enough to fit into his limited vision of who she should be. The divorce that Preston had meant as a way to escape their marriage and start over with Tiffany had instead become Naomi's doorway to something infinitely better. "Come on," Genevieve said, linking her arm through Naomi's. "Let's go celebrate. I made reservations at that new French restaurant downtown." "The one that's impossible to get into?" Naomi asked. "When you're a billionaire heiress, nothing is impossible," Genevieve said with a grin. "Plus, I told them we were celebrating your divorce from a man who clearly never deserved you in the first place." The chef said that was cause for his best champagne. Naomi laughed, the sound echoing in the courthouse hallway. She'd spent so many years being quiet and careful and afraid to take up too much space. Now she was walking out of her divorce hearing with her best friend, heading to an exclusive restaurant to celebrate her freedom with expensive champagne. Preston had wanted to leave her with nothing. Instead, he'd lost everything that mattered. And Naomi? She was just getting started. The grand opening of Laurent Design Collective's headquarters happened on a Tuesday evening in May, exactly 4 months after those first photos of Naomi and Genevieve had gone viral. The office space occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the Arts District, with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough natural light to make any designer weep with joy. Naomi stood near the entrance watching guests arrive, and she still couldn't quite believe this was real. Her business cards read, Naomi Bryant, creative director and co-founder. The walls displayed photographs of their completed projects, including a celebrity's mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest last month. The space buzzed with conversation from potential clients, design media, and other entrepreneurs who'd come to see what all the excitement was about. "You look terrified," Genevieve said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Stop that. You belong here." "I keep thinking someone's going to realize I'm faking it," Naomi admitted. "You're not faking anything," Genevieve said firmly. "You transformed a rundown mansion into a showpiece in 6 weeks. You managed contractors, stayed under budget, and delivered something that made a grown man cry with happiness. That's not fake. That's talent." Naomi accepted the champagne and took a sip. Genevieve was right. The mansion project had been intense, but Naomi had loved every minute of it. Choosing custom furniture, designing built-in shelving, selecting light fixtures that transformed each room. Watching her vision come to life in 3 dimensions instead of just sketches and mood boards. That was what she'd always wanted to do, what she'd been trained to do, what she was actually good at. "Miss Bryant." A woman in her 50s approached, elegant in a designer suit. "I'm Margaret Chin. I own the Riverside Hotel Group. I've been following your work and I'd love to discuss a project with you." "The Riverside Hotels?" Naomi repeated, trying not to sound as excited as she felt. Riverside was one of the largest luxury hotel chains in the country. "I'd be honored to discuss it." They exchanged business cards, and Margaret promised to call her office the next day to set up a formal meeting. As she walked away, Genevieve squeezed Naomi's hand. "See? You're not faking it. You're actually doing it." The evening continued in a blur of introductions and conversations and business cards collected. Naomi met developers who wanted to discuss residential projects, retail executives looking for flagship store designs, and even a gallery owner who wanted her space redesigned. By the time the last guest left around 9 o'clock, Naomi's feet hurt from her heels and her face ached from smiling, but she felt more alive than she had in years. "That was incredible," she told Genevieve as they collapsed onto the modern sofa in the main office area. "I can't believe how many people showed up." "I can," Genevieve said. "We've been promoting this for weeks, your projects have been getting amazing press, and people are curious about the woman who went from mystery shopping companion to successful designer practically overnight. You're interesting, Naomi. People want to work with interesting people." Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Barbara Chin. "Divorce decree finalized and filed. Congratulations on your freedom." She showed it to Genevieve, who immediately proposed a toast. To freedom from men who couldn't see what they had. And to building something amazing without them. They clinked glasses, and Naomi felt a wave of gratitude so strong it made her eyes sting with tears. 6 months ago, she'd been sitting in her car outside her house, listening to Preston plan to leave her with nothing. She'd felt small and invisible and worthless. Now she was sitting in her own beautiful office, co-owner of a thriving business, with more opportunities than she'd ever dreamed possible. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For believing in me. For taking a chance on me. For being my friend when I needed one desperately. Always," Genevieve promised. "But Naomi? I didn't make this happen. You did. I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else, all the success and the clients and the recognition, that's all because of your talent and hard work. Don't forget that." Over the next few months, Laurent Design Collective became one of the most sought-after firms in the city. They completed the Riverside Hotel redesign, which led to 3 more hotel contracts. They redesigned a flagship retail store for a major fashion brand. They transformed a penthouse for a tech entrepreneur who then referred 5 of his wealthy friends. Naomi hired 2 junior designers and a project manager to help handle the workload. She moved out of her loft and bought a penthouse of her own, one with huge windows and a view of the city that made her feel like she was on top of the world. She started wearing the designer clothes she'd once thought were too fancy for her regular life. She got used to being recognized occasionally when she went out, used to people asking for her business card at coffee shops and art galleries. Her social media following grew to over 100,000 people who loved seeing her design process and her finished projects. Design magazines called her for interviews. A publisher reached out about doing a coffee table book featuring her work. She was invited to speak on panels about women in design and building a business from the ground up. And through all of it, she thought about Preston exactly 0 times. Until one afternoon when she was having lunch with a client and saw him across the restaurant with Tiffany. They looked miserable, picking at their food and not talking. Preston's hair was longer than he usually kept it, and he'd lost weight in a way that made him look tired rather than fit. He saw Naomi at the exact moment she saw him. Their eyes met across the restaurant for just a second before Naomi deliberately turned back to her client and continued their conversation about bathroom tile options. She didn't acknowledge Preston's existence. Didn't wave or nod or show any sign that she'd recognized him. He was just another stranger in a crowded restaurant, someone completely irrelevant to her life. She did notice, though, that he and Tiffany left their food unfinished and hurried out less than 10 minutes later. That small, petty part of her felt satisfied. Good. Let him see what he'd lost. Let him understand what he'd thrown away. Let him spend the rest of his life knowing he'd had something valuable and had been too stupid to appreciate it. But mostly, Naomi just felt grateful. Grateful that Preston had asked for the divorce instead of her having to be the one to end it. Grateful that he'd shown his true colors before she'd wasted any more years on their marriage. Grateful that his attempt to leave her with nothing had instead pushed her to claim everything she deserved. Preston had meant to break her. Instead, he'd set her free. And she would always be grateful to him for that, even if he never understood it himself. Naomi heard about Preston and Tiffany's breakup from her former neighbor who still lived on the same street as their old house. They ran into each other at a grocery store, and the neighbor couldn't wait to share the gossip. It was dramatic, the neighbor said, leaning in conspiratorially. Apparently Tiffany met someone else, someone with more money than Preston, and she just left him. Didn't even give him a proper breakup conversation. He came home one day and half her stuff was gone. Naomi made sympathetic noises while internally feeling absolutely nothing. She didn't wish bad things on Preston, but she couldn't bring herself to feel sorry for him either. He'd done the exact same thing to her, just with more warning. The universe had simply returned the favor. And get this, the neighbor continued, Preston lost his job too. Some kind of scandal at his company about inappropriate conduct. I heard he might have been involved with multiple affairs, not just Tiffany. Human Resources did an investigation and he got fired. He's been trying to find new work, but his reputation is kind of ruined. That's unfortunate, Naomi said, which was the most generous response she could manage. He tried to sell the house, but apparently he owes you money from the divorce settlement and can't afford to buy out your portion, the neighbor added. The whole thing is just a mess. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to reach out to you a few weeks ago? Naomi shook her head. If he did, I didn't get the message. I blocked his number months ago. Smart woman, the neighbor said. I always thought you were too good for him anyway. And look at you now. I've been following your business online. You're doing amazing. After they parted ways, Naomi sat in her car for a few minutes before starting the engine. She thought about the man who'd laughed about her paint samples and called her boring. The man who'd planned to leave her with almost nothing. The man who'd underestimated her so completely that he'd destroyed his own life in the process. She felt nothing about his failures except perhaps a distant sense that justice had been served. Not by her, she hadn't done anything to him except refuse to accept his attempts to minimize her. The consequences he was facing were entirely his own doing. Affairs with multiple women at his workplace. Hiding money from his wife. lying on legal documents, treating people as disposable when they no longer served his purposes. Preston had built his own disaster. She just refused to go down with him. Her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Normally she wouldn't answer, but something made her pick up. Naomi? Preston's voice came through, small and uncertain. Please don't hang up. She should have hung up. Should have blocked this number too. But curiosity made her stay on the line. How did you get this number? I have my ways, he said, which was such a Preston answer that it almost made her laugh. I need to talk to you. About everything. I made terrible mistakes and I want to apologize properly. You don't need to apologize to me, Naomi said calmly. We're divorced. You don't owe me anything anymore. I owe you an explanation at least, Preston insisted. Can we meet for coffee? Just once? I promise I won't ask you to take me back or anything like that. I just want to explain myself. No, Naomi said simply. Please, Preston said, and his voice cracked slightly. I lost everything. My job, my relationship, my reputation. I have nothing left. I just need to talk to someone who knew me before all of this, someone who might understand. I'm not your therapist, Naomi said. I'm not your friend. I'm not even your ex-wife in any meaningful sense. We're strangers who used to be married. That's all. Naomi, please. I hope you find help, Naomi said, and she meant it. I hope you figure out why you keep hurting people and fix it. But I can't be part of your healing process. You need to do that work on your own. She hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked the number. Then she texted Barbara Chin to let her know Preston had found a way to contact her and to handle any future communications through legal channels only. Barbara responded within minutes. Done. If he tries to contact you directly again, it could be considered harassment. I'll send him a formal cease and desist. Naomi felt the tension leave her shoulders. This was exactly why she'd hired good lawyers. They protected her from having to deal with Preston's drama, from being pulled back into his chaos just when she'd finally built something stable and beautiful. That evening, she had dinner with Genevieve at a new restaurant that had just opened downtown. As they looked over the menu, Genevieve said casually, I heard Preston's been trying to reach out to you. News travels fast, Naomi observed. He called the Lauren fashion offices trying to get your contact information, Genevieve admitted. My assistant told him we don't give out personal information about our partners. He got kind of aggressive about it, actually. Threatened to show up at our office building. Please tell me you have security, Naomi said, feeling a flutter of actual worry. We absolutely have security, and they have his photo with instructions not to let him in, Genevieve assured her. I wanted you to know though, in case he tries to approach you somewhere public. He sounded kind of desperate on the phone. Naomi took a sip of water and considered this information. She didn't think Preston would actually hurt her, but desperate people did unpredictable things. I'll be careful. Thanks for the heads up. Have you thought about getting a restraining order? Genevieve asked carefully. Not yet, Naomi said. If he contacts me again or shows up somewhere he shouldn't, then yes. But for now I think he's just panicking because his life fell apart and he's trying to find someone to blame besides himself. Classic Preston, Genevieve said with a roll of her eyes. Taking responsibility has never been his strong suit. They spent the rest of dinner talking about work, about the new projects they were pitching, about the possibility of expanding to open a second office location in New York. Normal, exciting business conversation that had nothing to do with Naomi's failed marriage or her ex-husband's current crisis. This was her life now. Moving forward, building something meaningful, surrounded by people who valued her talent and her vision. Preston was just a chapter in her past, one that had taught her important lessons about knowing her worth and refusing to settle for less than she deserved. Whatever happened to Preston from here was his problem to solve. Naomi had her own life to live, and it was going to be extraordinary. 1 year after those first photos of her shopping with Genevieve had gone viral, Naomi stood on the stage of a downtown conference center and looked out at an audience of 300 people. They were here for the Lauren Design Collective Anniversary Celebration and Industry Showcase, an event that had sold out within 48 hours of tickets going on sale. Thank you all for being here, Naomi said into the microphone, her voice steady and confident. A year ago I was at a crossroads. I just agreed to a divorce, I was questioning every choice I'd ever made, and I had no idea what my future looked like. Then an old friend reached out with an opportunity that changed everything. She gestured to where Genevieve sat in the front row, smiling proudly. Genevieve and I launched this company with a vision of creating luxury spaces that feel both elegant and livable. Spaces that reflect the people who inhabit them, not just current trends or designer egos. Over the past year, we've completed 23 projects. We've been featured in 12 major publications. We've hired 8 talented designers and opened a second office in New York. The audience applauded, and Naomi let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. 23 projects. 8 employees. Offices in 2 cities. Revenue in the millions. Recognition from the industry she'd always dreamed of being part of. But more than the business success, Naomi continued, this year has taught me something crucial about knowing your worth. About not letting anyone make you smaller than you are. About building the life you actually want instead of the life someone else thinks you should have. She saw several women in the audience nodding, relating to her words in a way that made her chest feel tight with emotion. So to anyone out there who's been told they're not good enough or talented enough or ambitious enough, I want you to know something. You are enough. Exactly as you are. And the right opportunities will recognize that. The right people will recognize that. You just have to be brave enough to believe it yourself first. The applause was thunderous. Naomi smiled and thanked everyone again before stepping off the stage. Genevieve met her with a hug and champagne. That was perfect, Genevieve said. You're a natural at this. I'm really not, Naomi laughed. I was terrified the entire time. You couldn't tell at all, someone said behind her. Naomi turned to find a man in his early 40s, tall and handsome in a quiet way that was the opposite of Preston's aggressive confidence. He had kind eyes and a genuine smile. I'm Julian Chin. I'm an architect, and I worked on the hotel project you mentioned in your presentation. I just wanted to say that your design work is incredible. The way you incorporated the existing structure while making it feel completely new was brilliant. Thank you, Naomi said, shaking his hand. The architecture gave me so much to work with. Your spatial planning made my job significantly easier. They talked for a few minutes about the hotel project, about the challenges of renovation work, about the balance between preservation and innovation. Julian was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in the design process, and clearly knowledgeable about his own field. When he asked if she'd like to have coffee sometime to discuss potential collaborations, Naomi said yes without hesitation. I'm not asking you on a date, Julian clarified quickly, his ears turning slightly red. I mean, I would like to ask you on a date eventually if you're interested, but right now I'm genuinely just talking about work collaboration. I didn't want to be inappropriate at a professional event. Naomi found herself laughing, genuinely charmed by his awkwardness. I appreciate the clarification. Let's start with coffee about work and see where things go from there. They exchanged business cards and Julian promised to email her to set something up. As he walked away, Genevieve appeared at Naomi's elbow again. He's cute, she observed, and clearly interested. He's nice, Naomi agreed, which is honestly a low bar, but after Preston it feels revolutionary. You deserve nice, Genevieve said firmly. You deserve someone who appreciates your talent and your ambition and your strength. Someone who makes you feel good instead of small. Over the next few months, Naomi and Julian had that coffee meeting, which led to several more meetings about potential projects, which eventually led to an actual date. Then another date. Then several more. Julian was everything Preston hadn't been. He asked about her work and actually listened to her answers. He celebrated her successes without feeling threatened. He was comfortable with her ambition and her growing fame in the design world. He made her laugh and challenged her thinking and treated her like an equal partner in everything they did together. 6 months after they started dating, Julian asked her to move in with him. Not because it made financial sense or because he needed someone to take care of his space, but because he genuinely loved spending time with her and wanted to build a life together. I know you already have that amazing penthouse, Julian said as they sat on his balcony overlooking the city. And I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm just saying I'd love to wake up next to you every morning if you're interested in that. I'm interested, Naomi said, and she meant it. She'd learned to trust her instincts again, to believe in her own judgment about people and situations. Julian felt right in a way Preston never had. Comfortable and exciting all at once. They combined their spaces, Julian's modernist apartment and Naomi's designer penthouse, into a new loft that reflected both of their styles. Naomi designed the entire renovation herself, creating a space that was simultaneously a home and a showcase of her abilities. It was featured in Metropolitan Home magazine as an example of successful collaborative living spaces. Lauron Design Collective continued to grow. They opened a third office in Los Angeles. They won several industry awards. Naomi was invited to speak at design conferences around the country. She wrote that coffee table book, which became a bestseller in the design category. Her Instagram following grew to over 500,000 people who loved following her projects and her personal life. And Preston? She heard through former mutual friends that he eventually found a new job at a smaller real estate firm. That he was in therapy working through his issues. That he'd apologized to several people he'd hurt over the years, though he never tried to contact Naomi again after that one phone call she'd shut down. She hoped he was doing better genuinely. Not because she cared about him specifically, but because she'd learned that carrying anger and resentment only hurt herself. Preston had taught her valuable lessons about knowing her worth and refusing to settle. For that, she could be grateful even while acknowledging that he'd been a terrible husband. 2 years after the divorce, Naomi stood in the Lauron Design Collective offices, now expanded to take up 2 full floors of their building, and looked out at the city below. The same city where she'd once sat in her car crying after overhearing Preston plan to leave her with nothing. The same city where she'd hidden her talents and made herself small to keep a man comfortable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Dinner tonight at that place you love? I have something I want to ask you." Naomi smiled, already knowing what he was going to ask. They'd been talking about marriage casually for months, both of them on the same page about wanting to build something permanent together. This time, though, it would be a partnership between equals. 2 people who respected each other's work and supported each other's dreams and made each other better. She texted back a yes and returned to reviewing design proposals for their latest project. A boutique hotel in Miami that would be their biggest undertaking yet. She had a meeting with the client in an hour, then drinks with Genevieve to celebrate landing a celebrity client who wanted her entire mansion redesigned. Her life was full of work she loved, people who valued her, opportunities she'd earned through talent and determination. Preston had wanted to leave her with nothing. Instead, he'd left her with everything. Everything that actually mattered. Everything she'd built for herself. Everything she deserved.